The loudest way to prove someone wrong is with silence, because silence says everything they're too afraid to hear. Let's set the stage. Picture this. You're standing in the aftermath of yet another argument, drained, exhausted, wondering if your words will ever reach him. You've explained, defended, pleaded, and still he acts like he doesn't hear you. That's because he doesn't want to hear you. To him, your voice is just part of the noise he thrives on. Every word you give him fuels his ego, reassures him that he still has a grip on your emotions. But what happens when you stop? When you let the silence stretch, unbroken and unyielding? That's when the game changes. Silence is the one thing he can't manipulate, the one response he can't twist to fit his narrative. It's not submission, it's a declaration that his games no longer deserve your energy. Let me introduce you to Olivia. She's the woman everyone admires. Strong, compassionate, a force to be reckoned with. But behind the surface, Olivia is struggling. She's caught in the web of a man who thrives on control, a man who thinks her love is his safety net. He speaks to her in half-truths, strings her along with empty promises, and pushes her boundaries to see how far she'll bend. And when she tries to speak up, he gaslights her, twisting her words, making her feel like she's the problem. But Olivia isn't the problem. He is. Here's the truth about men like him. They feed off your reaction. Every time you cry, argue, or explain yourself, you give him what he wants: your energy, your attention, your power. He thrives on the noise, the chaos, the back and forth that keeps him at the center of your world. But what happens when you go silent? When you refuse to engage, to defend yourself, to justify your worth? That's when his game falls apart. Because silence is not submission, it's strength. And Olivia? She's about to learn just how powerful her silence can be. Imagine a boxing ring. He's in one corner throwing punches, trying to provoke you into a fight. But instead of stepping into the ring, you stay in your corner, arms crossed, calm and unmoved. He's swinging at air, his power fading with every empty hit. That's what silence does. It robs him of the reaction he craves, forcing him to confront the void he's created. Olivia didn't see this at first. She thought if she just explained herself better, if she just tried harder to make him understand, things would change. But the more she talked, the more he twisted her words. The more she fought, the more he weaponized her emotions. It wasn't until she stopped fighting, stopped explaining, stopped reacting, that she realized the truth. Her silence was her power. You might be thinking, what if silence makes me seem weak? What if he thinks I don't care? But let me ask you this. What has arguing, pleading, or chasing gotten you so far? Silence isn't weakness. It's control. It's telling him without a single word that you're done playing his game. That his manipulations, his tricks, his tactics no longer hold any weight. Olivia learned this when she stopped responding to his late-night texts, his weak apologies, his empty promises. At first, he didn't notice, but then as days turned into weeks, he started to panic. The silence he once dismissed became deafening. Here's why silence works. It forces him to face himself. Without your reactions, without your energy, he's left alone with the truth of his actions. And trust me, that truth is louder than anything you could ever say. Olivia's silence wasn't just an absence of words. It was a presence of strength. She didn't ghost him out of pettiness or play hard to get. She chose silence because she refused to waste another word on someone who wasn't listening. Was it easy? No. There were moments Olivia wanted to break the silence, to reach out, to explain herself one last time. But every time she felt the urge, she reminded herself of this. Her peace was worth more than his validation. Silence wasn't about punishing him. It was about protecting her. Picture this: Olivia walking into a room, radiant, confident, and unbothered. He's there, watching her, desperate for the connection he once took for granted. But she doesn't flinch, doesn't falter, doesn't even acknowledge him. That's the power of silence. It's not just the absence of words, it's the presence of self-respect. Say it with me: my silence is my crown. Now drop this affirmation in the comments and claim it boldly. Let the world see the power of a woman who chooses peace over chaos, dignity over drama, and self-worth over games. Type it, say it, live it. My silence is my crown. And when you're at it, press that like button and subscribe. Your rise starts now. Number 1. He thinks your silence means defeat. It's your declaration of power. He thinks your silence means he's won, but silence isn't surrender. It's a declaration that his games are beneath you. Olivia had spent months trying to make him understand. She had explained, argued, and cried, all in the hope that he would finally get it. But he didn't. Every word she spoke felt like it vanished into thin air, leaving her drained and questioning herself. And the worst part? He thought her silence, the moment she finally stopped talking, was a sign of defeat. He thought he had broken her. But Olivia wasn't broken. She was just done. Here's the hard truth about men like him. They think they thrive on power, but what they actually thrive on is your reaction. Every tear, every argument, every moment you try to explain yourself is fuel for their ego. To them, your engagement, whether it's anger, frustration, or desperation, is proof that they still matter. They see silence as the absence of those reactions, as if it means you've given up. But that's because they don't understand the power of silence. Silence isn't defeat, it's strategy. And Olivia? She was about to show him what silence really means. Picture this: he's a performer on a stage, and your reactions are the applause that keeps him going. Every time you react, it's like clapping for his show, giving him the energy to continue. But what happens when the applause stops? What happens when the audience gets up, leaves the theater, and doesn't even bother to turn around? That's what your silence does. It's not retreat. It's refusal to participate in a game designed to wear you down. At first, Olivia struggled. After months of engaging with his manipulative tactics, staying silent felt unnatural. She wanted to defend herself, to call him out, to remind him of what he was losing. But she realized something powerful. Silence wasn't just about denying him her energy. It was about reclaiming her own. Every word she didn't say became a moment she used to heal, to rebuild, to focus on herself. You might be thinking, but if I stay silent, doesn't that mean he wins? Doesn't that let him get away with it? Here's the answer: no. He only wins if you keep playing the game. Silence is your way of flipping the board, of saying, I'm done with this nonsense, and I'm done with you. A man who needs your reaction to feel powerful isn't winning. He's clinging to a false sense of control. Your silence forces him to face the one thing he's been avoiding all along: himself. The first time Olivia ignored his text, he didn't notice. The second time, he assumed she was busy. But when days turned into weeks and her silence remained unbroken, panic started to creep in. He tried his usual tactics, throwing breadcrumbs of attention, sending vague, I miss you messages, even trying to provoke her with guilt. But Olivia's silence held firm, and with every unanswered attempt, his confidence wavered. Here's the beauty of silence. It shifts the power dynamic. When you stop explaining, stop defending, stop reacting, you remove his ability to control the narrative. Suddenly, he's the one left wondering, overthinking, doubting. Silence is the mirror he can't avoid, reflecting the emptiness of his actions. And trust me, that reflection stings more than any words you could ever say. Imagine him sitting alone, staring at his phone, waiting for a reply that will never come. He thought your silence meant you were defeated, but now he's starting to realize the truth. Your silence is your boundary. It's the line he can't cross, the fortress he can't breach, the proof that his hold on you's gone. Was it easy for Olivia? No. There were nights when the urge to respond almost consumed her. She wanted closure, clarity, validation. But then she reminded herself, her peace was more important than his understanding. She didn't owe him an explanation for her silence, just like she didn't owe him her energy anymore. Silence isn't passive. It's powerful. It's saying, I refuse to waste my words on someone who didn't value them in the first place. It's choosing yourself over the chaos he brings. Olivia's silence wasn't about shutting him out. It was about letting herself in. It was about creating space to heal, to reflect, to grow. And here's the thing about silence. It speaks louder than any argument ever could. The man who ignored your voice will never forget your silence. He'll replay the moments he took for granted, the words you didn't say, the absence that feels like a void he can't fill. And by the time he realizes what he lost, you'll be so far gone that his regret will be nothing more than a whisper in your world. Say this with me. My silence is my crown. Let it remind you of your power, your worth, your dignity. Silence isn't surrender. It's your way of taking back control. It's the final word in a conversation that never deserved your voice to begin with. Let your silence be the proof that you've moved on, that you've risen above, and that you'll never settle for anything less than the peace you deserve. Number 2, he thinks he's still in control. Silence leaves him powerless. He thinks control is about what he can say or do to you, but real control is when you stop reacting, and silence takes the reins. Olivia was no stranger to his games. Every text he sent, every breadcrumb he threw away, every vague apology or half-hearted promise, it was all designed to keep her within his grasp. He thrived on her reactions, on the way she'd respond to every move he made. To him, that was control. He believed that as long as she engaged, he could call the shots. What he didn't realize was that Olivia had already started slipping through his fingers. She had discovered the one thing that would strip him of the power he thought he had: silence. Here's the thing about men like him. They're not afraid of confrontation. In fact, they crave it. Arguments, explanations, and emotional outbursts are all fuel for their ego. Every time you try to make them see your side, they feel validated, knowing they've managed to stay at the center of your world. But silence? Silence terrifies them. It's the one thing they can't manipulate, can't twist, and can't control. Silence isn't just the absence of words, it's the absence of power on their part. Picture this. He's holding a remote control, thinking he's changing the channel of your emotions at will. But suddenly, the remote stops working. He presses buttons, frantically, but nothing happens. That's what your silence does. It renders his manipulations useless, leaving him powerless to provoke you. And without your reaction, his so-called control crumbles. At first, Olivia struggled. Silence felt foreign, unnatural. She wanted to respond to his provocations, to call him out, to show him that she wouldn't be played. But then she realized that's exactly what he wanted. Engaging with him, even to argue, meant giving him power, So, she stopped. She stopped replying to his messages, stopped reacting to his attempts to provoke her, and stopped letting his actions dictate her emotions. You might be thinking, but if I go silent, doesn't that give him control by default? Absolutely not. Silence isn't about letting him win. It's about refusing to play his game. Control doesn't come from reacting to someone else's moves. It comes from deciding to make none of your own until they're on your terms. Olivia's silence wasn't passive. It was intentional. Every moment she chose not to respond was a moment she reclaimed her power. And here's what happened. He noticed. At first, he thought it was a phase. He assumed she'd cave, that she'd come running back like she always did. But when the silence continued, when his texts went unanswered, his provocations met indifference, he started to panic. He sent longer messages, more desperate attempts to break through the wall she had built. But Olivia held her ground. Her silence wasn't just a boundary, it was a fortress. Here's why silence works. It forces him to confront himself. Without your reactions, without your energy feeding his games, he's left alone with his own actions. And trust me, that's a reality he's not prepared for. Men like him rely on control to avoid accountability. Your silence shines a spotlight on the cracks in his facade, leaving him nowhere to hide. Imagine him sitting alone, staring at his phone, scrolling through unanswered messages. He thought he was in control, but now he's the one overthinking, the one questioning his moves, the one feeling powerless. Silence flips the script, putting the weight of uncertainty on his shoulders instead of yours. Was it easy for Olivia? Of course not. Silence requires strength, patience, and a deep belief in your own worth. There were moments when she wanted to reach out, to explain herself, to give him one last chance to understand. But every time she felt the urge, she reminded herself, his understanding isn't my responsibility. Her peace was worth more than his validation. You might wonder, what if he doesn't notice? What if he doesn't care? Let me tell you this, he will notice, he will care. Silence is louder than any words you could say. It's a mirror reflecting his irrelevance, a void he can't fill, a reminder that the control he thought he had was an illusion. Picture Olivia now, calm, composed, unbothered. He's trying to provoke her, but her silence stands tall, a wall he can't break. He thought he held all the cards, but now he's left with nothing. And Olivia, she's moved on, free from the chaos he once brought into her life. Say this with me. My silence takes back the power he never deserved. Let it fuel you. Silence isn't a sign of weakness. It's proof of your strength, your boundaries, your decision to rise above. He thinks he's in control because he hasn't yet realized what your silence means. Let him learn. Let him feel the power of your absence, and by the time he does, you'll already be miles ahead. Number 3. He thinks you'll miss him. Silence makes him miss you. He thinks you'll sit in the quiet, longing for him, but silence flips the script. It's not you who misses him, it's him who feels your absence. Olivia had spent countless nights in the quiet, her heart aching, her mind replaying memories of him. She thought silence would only magnify the emptiness, that she'd crumble under the weight of missing him, and that's exactly what he counted on. He assumed her love for him would keep her tethered, longing for the moments he had the power to give and take away. But what Olivia didn't realize was this. The silence she feared wasn't her weakness. It was her weapon. Here's the truth about men like him. They think they're irreplaceable. He believed that no matter how much he pulled away, she would still feel his absence like a hole in her chest. He thought her longing for him would keep her waiting, hoping, and reaching out. But what he didn't see coming was Olivia's silence. And when she stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped trying, he felt something he wasn't prepared for: her absence. Imagine this. He's walking through a room, expecting everything to be in its place. He reaches for the things he's always relied on: your attention, your energy, your love, and finds nothing. The silence he thought would break you becomes the void that haunts him. That's the shift silence creates. It doesn't make you miss him, it makes him miss you. Olivia's turning point came when she realized missing him wasn't a sign of her weakness. It was a reflection of her love, and she deserved someone who reciprocated that love. Instead of reaching out when she missed him, she sat with the feeling, let it pass, and focused on herself. Every time she resisted the urge to break the silence, she grew stronger, while he became more uncertain. You might be wondering, what if silence makes him forget me? But let me ask you this: how could anyone forget a woman like you? Silence doesn't erase your presence, it amplifies it. It forces him to notice what he took for granted. Without your texts lighting up his phone, without your voice softening his day, he's left with the truth. It wasn't your absence he needed to fear. It was the fact that you were done waiting. As Olivia's silence stretched, the dynamic shifted. He started checking his phone, wondering why her name wasn't there. He began questioning if she had moved on, if someone else was now the recipient of her love. The man who once believed she'd miss him was now the one feeling the sting of her absence. Say this with me: I am the one who is missed, not the one who misses. Let it remind you of your worth. He thinks silence is your defeat, but it's your triumph. The man who thought you'd miss him will be the one missing you long after you've moved on. Let your silence teach him what words never could. Number 4. He thinks you'll wait forever. Silence tells him time's up. He thinks you'll wait forever because you always have. Silence is how you tell him his time is up. Olivia had spent far too long waiting for him to call, to apologize, to show up like he promised. Waiting for him to finally realize her worth. Every time he let her down, he'd come back just enough to keep her hopeful. An apology here, a compliment there, a vague promise about someday. And Olivia, like so many women, believed it. She thought if she waited long enough, loved hard enough, and forgave enough, he would change. But what Olivia didn't see at first was this: he had no intention of changing. Why would he? He thought she'd wait forever. Here's the hard truth: men like him don't see time the way you do. To you, every passing moment is another piece of your life slipping by. To him, time is something he thinks he controls. He believes he can string you along indefinitely, coming back whenever it's convenient for him, because he assumes you'll always be there. Why wouldn't he think that? You've been there before. But let's get one thing straight. Your time is not infinite, and it's not his to waste. The man who thinks you'll wait forever is counting on your patience to work in his favor. Every time you tolerate his excuses, every time you accept his breadcrumbs, every time you stay silent about how much his delays hurt you, you're reinforcing his belief that he can keep you in limbo. Picture this. You're standing in a train station, holding a ticket for a train that keeps getting delayed. You tell yourself to wait a little longer, that it's just running late, that it's worth it. Meanwhile, other trains are arriving and departing, taking passengers to incredible destinations. But you stay, clinging to the idea that this one train is the only way to get where you want to go. That's what waiting for him feels like, a constant state of limbo while the rest of your life passes you by. One day, Olivia decided she was done waiting. She didn't make a grand announcement or give him an ultimatum. She simply stopped. She stopped texting first, stopped rearranging her plans for him, stopped giving him the benefit of the doubt, and most importantly, she stopped expecting him to change. Instead, she let her silence do the talking. Here's why silence is so powerful. It shifts the dynamic. He thought Olivia would always be there, patiently waiting for him to get his act together. Her silence told him otherwise. Silence isn't just the absence of words, it's the presence of self-respect. It's saying, I'm no longer willing to put my life on hold for someone who doesn't value my time. At first, he didn't notice. Men like him rarely do. He assumed she was busy, that she'd come back like she always did. But as days turned into weeks, the reality started to sink in. Olivia wasn't waiting anymore, and that realization hit harder than any words ever could. You might be thinking, what if I stop waiting and he finally decides he's ready? Let me ask you this. Why would you want someone who only chooses you when they feel the fear of losing you? A man who values you doesn't make you wait. He shows up, fully and consistently, because he knows your worth. If he can't see that now, silence isn't just an option, it's your only answer. Imagine him sitting alone, scrolling through his phone, wondering why your name hasn't popped up in his notifications. He starts to feel the emptiness your silence has left behind. But Olivia isn't there to fill it anymore. She's busy living her life, building her dreams, and finding joy in places where he was never needed. Was it easy for Olivia? No. There were moments when she doubted herself, when she missed him, when she wondered if waiting just a little longer would have changed things. But every time she felt the pull to reach out, she reminded herself of this. Her time was too precious to waste. Waiting wasn't loyalty, it was a form of self-abandonment, and she was done abandoning herself. Say this with me. My time is mine, and I refuse to waste it on anyone who doesn't value it. Let it empower you. Silence isn't about punishing him. It's about freeing yourself. It's about stepping off the train platform, realizing there are better destinations, and boarding a train that takes you somewhere worth going. The man who thinks you'll wait forever doesn't understand your worth, but silence will teach him. By the time he realizes your time is up, you'll already be gone, living a life that doesn't revolve around his excuses. Let your silence be the clock that finally runs out on him. Number 5. He thinks he can replace you. Your silence proves otherwise. He thinks you're replaceable because he's never met a woman who knows her worth in silence. Olivia was no stranger to his arrogance. Every time he pulled away, he did so with the confidence that she would still be there when he decided to return. Why wouldn't he think that? He had her loyalty, her patience, her time, all things he took for granted. And when he felt like pushing boundaries, he made it painfully clear that he thought he could find someone else just like her. But Olivia was about to teach him the lesson of a lifetime. There is no replacement for a woman who knows her value. Here's the truth about men who think they can replace you. They're playing a dangerous game of ego. He looks at you and sees someone amazing, but instead of appreciating it, he assumes he can find it anywhere. He believes the world is full of women who will tolerate his inconsistency, accept his excuses, and stay just like you did. But what he doesn't realize is this: he wasn't the reason you stayed. You were. Imagine this. He's walking into a jewelry store, holding a diamond he thinks he can trade in for another. He assumes that because it looks similar, it's just as valuable. But what he doesn't know is that the diamond he's holding is rare, one of a kind, and irreplaceable. That's you. And silence is how you remind him. When Olivia stopped responding to his games, something shifted. At first, he didn't notice. He thought he could replace her attention, her energy, her presence with someone new. But replacements don't last. The women who followed didn't have her patience. They didn't care about his excuses or stick around for his breadcrumbs. They didn't put up with the things Olivia once tolerated. Slowly, he began to realize that what he thought was common wasn't. And Olivia's silence? It echoed louder than any words ever could. You might be thinking, what if he really does replace me? What if I'm not special? Let me ask you this. Has anyone else ever brought what you bring to the table? Your heart, your effort, your energy. A man who thinks you're replaceable is blind to your worth, and your silence is the cure. It forces him to face the reality that what he thought was ordinary was extraordinary all along. Here's why silence works. It gives him space to see what life without you truly feels like. Every unanswered text, every unreturned call, every empty moment where he reaches for you and finds nothing, that's where the lesson begins. Silence isn't about punishing him. It's about removing your presence so he can feel the weight of your absence. Olivia didn't announce her silence. She didn't threaten him or try to make him understand. She simply walked away, let her actions speak louder than her words, and let the void she left behind teach him everything he needed to know. He thought he could replace her, but replacements don't compare to the original. Here's the twist. By the time he realized he couldn't replace Olivia, she no longer cared. She was busy building her life, filling her world with joy, and leaving no room for the man who had taken her for granted. His regret? It came too late. And by then, Olivia had moved on, proving that she was never the one who needed him. He was the one who needed her. Say this with me. I am irreplaceable, and my silence proves it. Let it empower you. The man who thinks he can replace you doesn't understand your worth, but silence will teach him. Let him try to find another you. He won't. And by the time he realizes it, you'll already be thriving in a life where he's nothing more than a distant memory. Let your silence be the proof that you were never replaceable and never will be. Number 6. He thinks he can provoke you. Silence disarms him. He thinks he can pull your strings, but silence is the knife that cuts them all. Olivia knew his patterns all too well. Every time she tried to distance herself, he found a way to provoke her. A careless comment, a cryptic message, or even a photo with someone new. He always seemed to know exactly what buttons to press. And for a while, it worked. Each time she reacted, she felt like she was falling right back into his trap. But one day, Olivia decided enough was enough. She realized that her reactions weren't just fueling his games, they were giving him the control he craved. It was time to take back her power, and she did it with silence. Here's the truth about men who provoke. Their goal isn't to fix the situation or even to win the argument. It's to keep you engaged. He wants you frustrated, emotional, overthinking. Why? Because as long as you're reacting, he's in control. Every angry text, every tearful response, every attempt to explain yourself is proof to him that he still matters. But silence? Silence is the one thing he can't handle. It's the one thing that takes the power out of his hands and places it firmly in yours. Imagine him as a puppeteer holding strings connected to your emotions. Every provocation is a pull, and every reaction is a sign that he's still in charge. But what happens when you stop moving? When his pulls meet resistance and his strings go slack? That's what silence does. It cuts the strings, leaving him powerless and exposed. Olivia's first step was recognizing his provocations for what they were, bait. When he sent a vague, "I heard you've been busy lately" message, she didn't bite. When he posted a picture with another woman, clearly meant to make her jealous, she didn't react. And when he tried to guilt her with, "I guess you don't care anymore," she didn't explain herself. Every time he tried to provoke her, her silence was her answer. You might be thinking, but doesn't silence let him think he's won? No. Silence isn't about letting him win. It's about refusing to play. When you stop reacting, you flip the script. His provocations lose their power, and he's left with nothing but his own insecurities. A man who thrives on control can't handle the void your silence creates. Here's why silence works so well. It shifts the focus. When you react, the spotlight stays on you, your emotions, your responses, your vulnerabilities. But when you stay silent, the spotlight turns back on him. He's forced to sit with his own actions, his own games, and his own insecurities. Without your reaction to validate him, he begins to question his own importance in your life. Picture this. He's sitting there, staring at his phone, waiting for the explosion he thought his provocation would trigger. But instead of fireworks, there's silence. Days pass, then weeks, and still nothing. At first, he brushes it off, assuming you're just trying to make a point. But as the silence stretches, doubt starts creeping in. What if she's really done? What if I've lost her? That's when the tables turn. Olivia's silence wasn't just a refusal to engage, it was a message. It said, "I see your games, and I'm no longer interested in playing." And as her silence grew louder, his provocations became weaker. He tried harder, escalating his attempts to get a reaction, but Olivia stood firm. Her silence wasn't just disarming, it was shattering the illusion of control he thought he had. You might wonder, what if silence makes him angry? What if he escalates? That's a risk, but it's one you can handle with boundaries. Silence doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. It means refusing to feed into it. If he crosses a line, you don't need to explain yourself. You simply walk away, block him, and protect your peace. By the time Olivia's silence had done its work, something incredible had happened. She no longer cared about his provocations. What once triggered her now felt irrelevant. And him. He was left scrambling, trying to figure out how he had lost the woman he thought he could control. Say this with me. I refuse to be provoked. My silence is my power. Let it remind you of your strength. The man who thinks he can provoke you doesn't know the power of your silence. Let him try, let him press, let him pull the strings. Then watch as his attempts fall flat. Because silence isn't just disarming, it's the proof that his control was always an illusion. By the time he realizes it, you'll already be free. Number 7. He thinks he can read you. Silence leaves him guessing. He thinks he knows your every move, but silence turns you into the one thing he can't predict. Olivia had always been an open book with him. She wore her heart on her sleeve, always explaining, always clarifying, always trying to make him understand. And he thought he had her figured out. He believed he could read her like a map, always knowing where she stood and what she was feeling. But what he didn't realize was that Olivia was about to close the book, and her silence would be the lock he couldn't pick. Here's the truth about men like him. They thrive on predictability. He relied on Olivia's openness to keep his power. When he pulled back, he knew she'd reach out. When he hurt her, he knew she'd explain why. When he left her confused, he knew she'd seek answers. That predictability gave him control. But silence? Silence leaves him grasping at straws, questioning everything and wondering if he ever knew her at all. Imagine him sitting with a puzzle, certain he knows how all the pieces fit. But then, the last piece, the one he thought he understood, is missing. That's what silence does. It removes his ability to predict your next move, leaving him in a state of doubt and confusion. The woman he thought he could read is suddenly a mystery he can't solve. For Olivia, this was a game changer. She stopped explaining herself. She stopped responding to his bait. She stopped giving him access to her emotions. Every time he tried to provoke her or draw her back into his orbit, her silence left him staring into a void. And that void forced him to do something he never wanted to do: question himself. You might be thinking, what if he doesn't care? What if he just moves on? But let me ask you this. Why would you want to stay predictable for someone who doesn't value you? Silence doesn't push him away. It forces him to confront the gaps in his assumptions. Without your words to fill the silence, he's left wondering if he ever really knew you at all. Here's why silence works. It creates uncertainty. When you stop being an open book, he starts doubting his control. Without your reactions to confirm his assumptions, he's left guessing, overthinking every word, every action, every move he made. And the more he guesses, the more he realizes he doesn't have the answers. Picture him scrolling through his phone, rereading old messages, trying to piece together where things went wrong. He thought he could predict you, but now you're a question he can't answer. Silence turns the tables, making him the one chasing clarity while you sit back, calm and unbothered. Olivia's silence wasn't just about protecting her peace. It was about reclaiming her power. She became the woman he couldn't read, the mystery he couldn't solve, the person he no longer understood. And as the silence grew louder, so did his frustration. He thought he had her figured out, but now he didn't even know where to start. Say this with me. I am unpredictable, and my silence is my strength. Let it remind you that you owe no one an explanation for your boundaries, your actions, or your peace. The man who thinks he can read you will never be able to guess your next move when silence is your answer. Let him wonder, let him overthink, let him drown in his assumptions, because silence isn't just power. It's the mystery he'll never solve. Number 8. He thinks you're playing hard to get. Silence proves you're done. He thinks your silence is a tactic, but silence isn't a game. It's your exit strategy. Olivia isn't just someone else. Olivia is you. You've been misunderstood, underestimated, and dismissed. He thinks your silence is just a phase, a way to make him chase you. He assumes you're still waiting, holding out for him to finally step up. But here's the truth. You're not playing hard to get. You're done. Men like him see silence as a move on the board, just another piece in the game he thinks he's controlling. But this time, you've flipped the board. You're not in the game anymore, and that's the part he can't wrap his head around. Silence isn't a strategy to win him back. It's your way of closing the door for good. Imagine him thinking he has time to make his next move, only to realize the clock has stopped. That's what your silence does. It's not a pause, it's the end. And the moment he realizes it isn't a tactic, but a decision, is the moment his confidence starts to crack. He thinks you're waiting for him to notice, to change, to chase. But Olivia, you aren't waiting anymore. You've moved on. Your silence isn't about manipulation. It's about peace. It's about choosing yourself over his games. Say this with me. I'm not playing hard to get. I'm done. Let it resonate. Let it remind you of the strength it takes to walk away. You're not silent to make him chase. You're silent because you've stopped chasing yourself. Let him think what he wants. By the time he realizes the truth, you'll already be gone. So, queens, are you ready to reclaim your power? Let this be your moment. If this message resonated, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that like button, subscribe, and declare your truth in the comments. I'm not playing, I'm done. Together, let's create a movement of women who rise above the noise, choose peace over games, and never settle for less than they deserve. Your journey starts now.